Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar on quality assurance for clinical operations, stress-reducing tips for successful regulatory inspection, presented by SDC and Stiris Research. I am Melanie Ciotti, our marketing strategist here at SDC. Our first distinguished speaker for today is Lee McWatters, Director of Quality Assurance at Stiris Research. Stiris Research is an entrepreneurial clinical trial management company providing full-service clinical trial support and quality solutions. Stiris has expertise in inspection preparedness, site and vendor audits, as well as quality management system development and gap analysis. Lee has nearly 3 decades of industry experience managing national and international clinical programs across a variety of therapeutic areas and disease indications. She has a Master of Science in Clinical Research and is a registered quality assurance professional in good clinical practice, or RQAP-GCP, as certified by the Society of Quality Assurance. Based in Toronto, Canada, Lee has a wealth of regulatory inspection experience with Health Canada, the US FDA, and the European Medicines Agency, or EMA, not only from her time at Stiris and at prior employers, but also as an independent quality consultant for various sponsor, CRO, and vendor clients. We are very fortunate to have Lee on the webinar today to share her expertise on this topic. Lee will be joined by Cevasco, Director of Quality Assurance at SDC. SDC is a data services-focused CRO specializing in strategic scientific consulting, biostatistics, data management, EDC, and IRT services, and providing scalable full-service support through complementary strategic partnerships like our partnership with Stiris Research. Lisa is a 13-year industry veteran with hands-on experience leading and participating in international regulatory agency inspections for both sponsors and CROs. Based in SDC's Tempe, Arizona office, Lisa has an engineering background and excels in root cause analysis, continuous improvement, and audit and inspection management. In her experience prior to SDC, she has dealt with the dreaded 483, a finding that took her 18 months to rectify, and one that motivates her inspection readiness efforts to this day. She looks forward to sharing her unique perspective on stress-reducing tips for a successful regulatory inspection. Now, I would like to orient you to today's agenda. Lee will lead off with an overview of the types of inspections carried out by the FDA, Health Canada, and EMA. Lisa will then cover the typical conduct of a regulatory inspection, or rather, what to expect from the sponsor or CRO's perspective. After that, Lisa will share her top 10 inspection readiness tips. Lee will then review some common findings from regulatory authorities and pitfalls to avoid. If time permits, I will lead us through Q&A based on the questions that were submitted by the audience. Thank you again for joining us today for Quality Assurance for Clinical Operations, Stress-Reducing Tips for a Successful Regulatory Inspection. Without further ado, please welcome Lee McWatters from Stiris Research.
Thank you, Melanie. Today's presentation will focus mainly on good clinical practice or GCP inspections. Each health authority has different terms, but they generally conduct the same types of inspections: pre-approval, post-approval, compliance follow-up, and for cause. Before we talk about the types of inspections, let's first talk about the why. Health authorities have the same why as sponsors, CROs, and investigative sites, and that is to protect the rights, safety, and well-being of the patients we treat and to ensure the quality, reliability, and integrity of the data that we collect. Let's first talk about pre-approval inspections. They are triggered by the submission of an application to market a new product. They can be domestic or foreign outside of the health authority's jurisdiction. In fact, many health authorities, such as the FDA, EMA, and Health Canada, have formed initiatives and have programs in place with the goal of achieving greater international harmonization of compliance standards in order to protect consumer safety. They conduct co-inspections, share inspection reports, and interact, in fact, almost daily. These inspections are usually announced with as many as 30 days advance notice. So who do they inspect? They inspect sponsors and CROs, investigative sites, which account for the majority of inspections, institutional review boards or IRBs, also known as ethics committees, research ethics boards, or research ethics committees, and labs such as hematology, biochemistry, or specialty labs. As are third-party service providers, such as companies that provide ECG equipment and central review, and even central imaging review. Post-approval inspections. As I mentioned, the main focus of today's webinar is GCP inspections. Post-approval inspections are mainly focused on good manufacturing practice, or GMP inspections, and device manufacturing, which follows a regular inspection schedule. The goal is to assess continuing compliance with regulations and standards, as well as assess the impact of changes in manufacturing or process. When post-approval inspections are conducted for GCP purposes, it's usually to ensure that safety reporting requirements are being met. Let's talk about compliance follow-up inspections. A compliance follow-up inspection is usually unannounced. The goal is to assess the corrective and preventive actions taken as a result of previous inspection findings, and not only to ensure action was taken, but also to ensure that it was indeed effective. For-cause inspections are always unannounced, with the health authority showing up at your door. The focus is on investigating a specific problem that the health authority has become aware of. This awareness may come from a complaint. Anyone can make a complaint: a sponsor or CRO, a healthcare professional, a patient or consumer, an employee or ex-employee of a company. All complaints are investigated internally by the health authority and, depending on the severity, may trigger a for-cause inspection. So who gets inspected? Let's look at the inspection metrics for 2018. The US FDA is the most active of the three health authorities we're discussing today. GCP inspections are carried out by the Bioresearch Monitoring Program, also known as BIMO. In 2018, BIMO conducted 1,622 domestic and foreign inspections. As you can see, 62% of those were conducted at clinical investigative sites, 17% at bioequivalence facilities, 11% at ethics committees or IRBs, and only 10% at sponsors and CROs. The inspection program in the EU is coordinated and supported by the EMA, but the National Competent Authority, or NCAs, of each member country is responsible for conducting the actual inspection. In 2018, 140 GCP inspections were conducted and 20 pharmacovigilance or PV inspections. Health Canada conducted 40 GCP inspections and 80 pharmacovigilance inspections. Note that the PV inspections did in fact include non-investigational products such as cosmetics. Neither the EMA or Health Canada inspect ethics committees or IRBs. I want to add that the health authority representatives conducting inspections for the EMA or NCAs and Health Canada are referred to as inspectors, whereas the FDA refers to them as investigators. This can create some confusion, as we also refer to physicians conducting trials at the clinical and investigative sites as investigators. For the purpose of today's webinar, we will use the term inspectors. So the moral of the story is to always be inspection ready. With that, I will hand this over to Lisa to discuss the conduct and flow of an inspection.
Thank you, Carolee. I'm going to walk us through what the typical conduct and flow is during a regulatory inspection and provide some details on things that you can expect to experience, some helpful tips on how to ensure that your company is getting through these inspections successfully. The first thing to do is upon inspector arrival at your facility. Whether it's an announced or unannounced visit, the head of QA or regulatory should greet the inspector at the front office space. Ensure that you're checking identification and credentials. Now, checking identification and credentials goes beyond presentation of a business card. Ensure that you're looking for that government-issued ID so that you can confirm the person that you think you're meeting is the person representing the regulatory authority body that they claim to be from. An anecdotal example we hear in the industry is when a company experienced an inspection, went through the process, and then attempted to follow up after the inspection had concluded with the regulatory authority, only to unfortunately realize that the regulatory authority did not have any record of that inspector or a scheduled inspection of the subject facility. So again, ensure you're greeting that inspector, but also checking their identification and credentials. After you've done this, escort the inspector to the appropriate room. Now I'll go over in a couple slides why this appropriate room selection is so important to ensuring a successful inspection. And then notify employees and any applicable parties. Provide notification and communication to employees of the company to let them know that an inspector has arrived and an inspector is at the facility. If you are a supporting organization or a CRO, notify any applicable parties as required by your SOPs. And again, I'll go into how to detail your SOPs to clearly designate what communication channels would be required when an inspector arrives at your facility. During the inspection, it is recommended to run a front room and a back room. Now I'll start by going through the expectations and typical conduct in the front room. The inspector is always located in the front room. Also in the front room, you'll have your head of quality and or regulatory as applicable, any heads of other departments such as R&D, operations, safety, or any other departments that are necessary to support the context of the inspection. You'll also have scribes. Now, scribes are responsible for taking down notes of the entire inspection process and for also communicating requests from the front room to the back room. In the back room, you can choose to run multiple back rooms, or if you don't have space, you can run multiple tables in a back room. Now, these tables and or back rooms should be designated to responsible areas to support the easy flow of inspection. For example, you could have one table or back room devoted to Q&A, one to R&D, and maybe another one to operations. This will help funnel necessary requests and ensure communication either at those tables or in the back room is subject to the inspection in the context of the inspection. Also, you will have a runner. The job of the runner is to go back and forth from the front room to the back room. Again, your scribe will be communicating formal requests from the inspector and or inspectors to the back room. The runner is responsible for running the documentation and or technological media to the front room for presentation to the inspector during the inspection. Now going on to what to expect during the inspection if you're located in the front room. As I mentioned, the inspector will most likely be present at all times in the front room unless on designated breaks. Ensure you're being professional and limit small talk and conversation. You can, of course, be friendly in your exchanges with the inspector, but keep in mind that all small talk within the room should be controlled if the inspector is present. Exchange business cards. When you first meet the inspector, have business cards available and present business cards to the inspector and or inspectors when meeting for the first time. It's important to provide lunch, water, snacks, and breakfast if the schedule allows, to ensure that your inspection flows successfully. You also want to make sure that you're providing these lunch, water, and snacks not just to the front room, but to any backroom employees supporting the inspection. This helps you keep all employees on site to support the inspection, as formal requests and communication can come up at any time through the course of an inspection. As I briefly mentioned earlier, escort your inspectors per your SOP. You should have a regulatory inspection SOP and ensure that your staff is trained adequately on the process and flow for when an inspector arrives and how to escort an inspector through your facility. Another anecdotal example that we hear in the industry is a company who designated that the inspector needed to be escorted to the bathroom at all times. This made for a contentious exchange when the inspector finally said, "I don't need to be escorted to the restroom." At this point, you're looking at a potential deviation to your SOP. And while the intent of escorting an inspector to the restroom is to obviously control their availability while they're in your facility, keep this in mind so that you can keep stress levels low and provide some freedom and flexibility through the course of the inspection. Ask for clarification as needed. Now, this point is directed to conversation and communication with the investigators. Ask for clarification so that you can understand the context of their request and communication so that you can frame your examples and answers so that you're adequately meeting their expectations. And last, and while this is a commonly overlooked thing, it can be actually one of the most important things to ensuring a successful inspection. Only answer what the inspector is asking. Inspectors will use gaps of silence through the course of an inspection. Now, they'll use this to review documentation. They'll use this to determine their next line or positional questioning, or an additional formal request. Do not feel pressured to fill this gap of silence. While gaps of silence typically make people uncomfortable, let the silence exist in the room and let the inspector drive additional communication after these gaps of silence. Now, if you're in the back room, just as the front room is asking for clarification to the inspector, it's your job to ask the front room for clarification for formal requests or additional requests for information as needed. Keep in mind you're going to be receiving most of your communication through the scribes who are located in the front room. They usually communicate through some type of technological media to the back room through Word documents detailing all formal requests and communication. If you're in the back room, you will not be privy to the context that those formal requests are being generated from in the front room. So ensure you're asking for clarification to make sure you understand the request and can adequately fulfill that request to ensure a successful inspection. Share background on documents prior to sending to the front room. If you're located in the back room, you're most likely a subject matter expert or somebody who directly supported the related project that is currently being inspected. Those in the front room might not have the context, background, or detailed information that you have on the line of questioning that the inspector is going through. If you're not called to the front room to present this information on your own, make sure that you're sharing that background with those in the front room so that you're all prepared to adequately address the inspector's comments, questions, and formal requests. Stamp all documentation confidential. Some inspectors prefer to have documentation printed for formal requests. And again, this is run between the back room and the front room by the runner. Utilize red confidential stamps and ensure that all documentation is stamped. On the other side, some inspectors are asking for USBs with electronic versions and copies of requested documentation when available. Have your documentation watermarked with confidential if you're providing it through an electronic media. Maintain a list of materials provided. You should keep a running Excel spreadsheet in the back room or per table of all documentation that is formally requested from the front room, assigned members of the back room to fulfill that request, and then a designation when that request has been fulfilled and the runner has taken that formal request from the back room to the front room. Limit conversations in public areas. While you're in the back room, it's more normally regarded as a safe space. But again, as I mentioned, because you might not know where your inspector is at your facility, depending on your SOP requirements, keep in mind that the inspector could be present. So limit your conversations in public areas. And lastly, the job of the back room is to keep employees notified. Employees who are not intimately involved either in the back room or the front room might not have all of the details or context as to what's occurring through the course of the inspection. It's helpful to provide communication such as the inspector has arrived, the inspector has broken for lunch, and the inspector has left for the day, so that employees can ensure that they know and are kept abreast of the course of the inspection. Now, after the inspection, it's important to review lessons learned. And lessons learned should be taken from two different perspectives. The first being the course and conduct of how your company managed the inspection. Review what worked well and what maybe could be improved upon to help you get through an inspection successfully in the future. If it's one of your first couple times going through inspections, these can be very stressful situations for employees, especially those who have not gone through this before. Once you come out at the end, you'll have an opportunity to review those key factors and determine what you can do better the next time. The second perspective is to review lessons learned from a project-based standpoint. You will learn things through the course of an inspection based on the inspector's line of questioning, formal requests, and any other communication throughout the inspection on potential ways that you can better your documentation, your project conduct, and your processes. Review these so that, again, you can ensure future inspections and future projects are not incurring the same potential issues that you experienced during this inspection. You will receive a regulatory authority report, typically within 30 days post-inspection. Some regulatory bodies will provide brief context during a closing meeting if there are any high-level critical findings and/or potential corrective actions that might be coming as a result of the inspection. But again, this is informal, and the suggestion is to wait for that regulatory authority report. So at that point, you can determine the next course of corrective action. And celebrate. This is by far one of the most important things to do through an inspection process. The days will be long, the days will be stressful. Employees will be pushed to limits that they might not have experienced prior. But it's important to celebrate the small level successes on a daily basis through the course of the inspection. But then make sure you're celebrating your employees after the inspection has concluded. Remember to also include those who haven't participated directly in the inspection, as an inspection affects the entire facility and company. So it's important to ensure that you're celebrating the successes as a company, with your company, through the entire process. Now to move on to inspection readiness tips. These are tips that will help ensure that you're making it through your inspection successfully. As I mentioned earlier, number one, develop an SOP on regulatory inspections. This SOP should include communication channels for when the inspector arrives, whether scheduled or unscheduled, at your facility,
The chain of communication, for example, if your head of quality or regulatory is not directly on site, it should include a phone tree for who to contact when an inspector arrives at a facility. It should also, again, include when an inspector needs to be escorted, and then from there, how you will manage communication, both externally, internally, and then how you will manage the closeout and follow-up of the inspection. Number 2, conduct regular internal audits of your facility and process. This is really important for ensuring that you're always maintaining a touch point into your processes and projects. Regular internal audits can help you prepare for inspections, especially those that are unscheduled. They help ensure that your documentation from a process perspective is up to date and reflective of the actual processes used throughout the project. Much like you conduct regular internal audits for your SOPs and processes, the third tip is to ensure that project documentation is up to date and readily available. Project documentation is important because this is most likely what will be requested during an inspection. Because you might be inspected years after you've submitted documentation for a specific project, ensure that your documentation is readily available. This might include retrieving from off-site storage and storing at your facility in preparation for an inspection. For projects that are being inspected in live real time, ensure your project documentation is up to date throughout the life of the project. Do not wait till requirements say that you need to have your documentation ready. Try to be proactive so that you can ensure you're successful if you have an unscheduled inspection. Maintain a library of SOPs, including retired and obsolete versions. As I mentioned earlier, you might be incurring an inspection on a project that had previously closed. Inspectors will expect to see SOPs that govern the processes used during the time course of that project. Have them available and easily retrievable so that you can ensure you're fulfilling those requests as quickly as possible through the course of the inspection. Also ensure that you are up to date on your SOPs and you know what processes might have been used during the time frame of the project and what processes you might be using now. Number 5, ensure proper technology support. Now this one might seem very basic, but it's something that can potentially trip up organizations as they conduct inspections. Have multiple printers available in the back room so that when you're fulfilling formal requests, you're not competing with general office staff to print out documentation, as the time frame to fulfill requests to inspectors is typically very quick. Have printer paper, printer toner, and printer ink as necessary on hand to support your inspection. Have USBs available. Again, some inspectors are choosing to receive their formal requests through USBs containing electronic versions of project documentation when available. Have these on hand to support your inspections. Number 6, carefully select your front room location. Your front room should be a room that is close to exits, close to washrooms, but generally separated from employee population. If you have the opportunity and are designing a building or facility for your company, keep this in mind when designating conference rooms. It's helpful to place conference rooms at the front of your facility, close to the entrance and exit, that are separated from that general employee population, so that you can help ensure a successful inspection and that your processes move smoothly. If you don't have the ability to design this from the beginning, carefully select that location while keeping all of these considering factors in mind. Number 7, if you have the opportunity to, for example, you have a scheduled inspection, we recommend that you conduct a mock inspection with an external consultant. This will help prepare your documentation, orient you with a typical inspection process, and help you knock it out of the park when the actual inspection occurs at your facility. You will learn things that you can do better and ways to better prepare for the formal inspection by bringing in that consultant and running your facility through a mock inspection. Coupled with this is number 8, conduct inspection readiness training with your staff. Now, this can be done whether or not you do or do not have a scheduled inspection. Just as you conduct regular internal audits of your facility, conduct the inspection readiness to help your staff stay inspection ready at all times. This will help eliminate stress and provide employees who might not have experienced formal inspections with what to expect during the process. If you manage expectations of your employees throughout this process, it will help reduce stress levels while you're experiencing a formal inspection. Number 9, stay current on industry activities related to your projects. As Carolee talked about the different timeframes for when inspections occur, if you're a CRO or a supporting organization, your work on a project might have since passed from when the company is submitting to a regulatory body. If you can stay current on these industry activities, you might be able to determine whether or not you will be needed to support a regulatory inspection or your facility will incur a regulatory inspection themselves. And last, but absolutely not least, is number 10. Be aware of regulations and guidelines from inspection agencies. All of the agencies post inspection results on their websites. Ensure that you're reviewing these to understand industry trends, areas of focus, and expectations from these inspection agencies, as they all have different requirements and regulations, but all use similar inspection strategies to ensure that safety, efficacy, and data integrity is maintained through the life cycle of a project. Carolee is going to go into a little bit about what investigation findings and pitfalls are out there and how you can avoid these to ensure successful inspections.
Thank you, Lisa. Let's look at the inspection outcomes for 2018. Health authorities use different terms to communicate the outcome of an inspection. The FDA uses Official Action Indicated, or OAI, Voluntary Action Indicated, or VAI, or No Action Indicated, or NAI. The EMA, or National Competent Authorities, use Critical, Major, and Minor. Finally, Health Canada simply uses Non-Compliant or Compliant. We aren't quite comparing apples to apples, as the FDA and Health Canada provide their rating for the inspection as a whole, and the EMA provides their metrics on individual observations. But clearly, the most serious outcomes are OAI, critical, and non-compliant. While these findings are relatively low, as you can see, ranging from about 1 to 8%, there's still work to be done, as the observations may jeopardize patient safety, data integrity, or potentially prevent an important new drug from making it to market. This information is available on the websites of each health authority and is good information to use when you're reviewing your quality management system or preparing for an inspection. We've included the links within the slide. So let's move on to the common findings. The first is protocol compliance. This always tops the list of common findings. This includes violations of eligibility criteria, but also a large number of minor violations, such as missed assessments, can also be deemed major. Moving on to sponsor oversight. This is referred to in the recently updated ICH E6 guidelines. It includes inadequate monitoring. Not only is a robust monitoring plan necessary, but reporting on monitoring must also be timely and accurate. I recently had a conversation with an FDA BIMO inspector at an annual quality conference. The inspector recounted that he had observed a large number of monitoring visit reports that were not completed in a timely manner. As such, the detail was insufficient and the inspector was unable to confirm what had been source verified at the site. The result was that all of the data from this particular site was excluded. This type of finding could prevent a sponsor from being able to meet or evaluate a study endpoint. Health authorities also expect sponsors and CROs to bring sites into compliance. It isn't enough to document and track issues. We must demonstrate that actions have been promptly taken to secure compliance. Finally, on this point, sponsors must maintain oversight of CROs and other vendors. Processes and documentation must be in place to demonstrate how a vendor was selected, how a vendor was qualified, and how quality was ensured throughout the life of the trial or program. Investigator oversight is another common observation. Health authorities are looking to see clear evidence of the investigator's footprint in that site documentation. They're not only responsible for delegation, but they're in fact responsible for ensuring that their staff have the necessary qualifications, experience, and documented training. They're also required to maintain oversight throughout the life of the trial. Moving on to informed consent. This continues to be an issue year after year. Informed consent is a process and not an event. We need to demonstrate continuing informed consent throughout the life of the trial. Some common findings are date errors, such as the patient and consenter signing the form on different dates, signatories not personally dating their signatures. For example, a study coordinator pre-fills the date onto the consent form, and most importantly, patients being consented by staff members not delegated to do so. Let's talk about records. A common finding is missing or inaccurate records from source to verify data entered into the database. Whether paper or electronic, all documentation should adhere to ALCOA standards: authentic, legible, contemporaneous, original, and accurate. Study documents, no matter what the format, must be retained as per local regulations and readily retrievable. I want to share an example that I observed during an investigative site audit. A subject had missed a number of medication doses. There was no explanation for the missed doses at the subsequent study visit. Approximately 1 month later, the pharmacist wrote a note providing an explanation. As this was not contemporaneous, this calls the validity of this documentation into question. I would also like to note that with the adoption of electronic systems, such as electronic medical records, we need to ensure that validation documentation is available to demonstrate that the system is functioning as it's intended. Talking about quality systems, another common finding, ICHE 6 also focuses on quality management. Quality must be managed through all stages of a clinical trial. This, of course, puts a focus on process, but also on risk identification, risk mitigation, and risk reporting. Finally, calibration and maintenance. All equipment used to collect, measure, or process patient data must be calibrated. Calibration ensures reliability of results. It's also necessary to ensure regular maintenance for continued reliability throughout the trial. This includes weight scales, blood pressure monitors, thermometers, and any other equipment used within the trial. Let's wrap up with some key takeaways. We can't stress enough the importance of being inspection ready. As Lisa mentioned, SOPs need to be in place. They need to be regularly reviewed because an SOP drafted 10 years ago may no longer be relevant. Make sure that validation documentation is available for all electronic systems that are used to collect or process data. For data that would be part of a submission to a health authority, the system needs to be compliant with 21 CFR Part 11 or EMA Annex 11 requirements. Ensure that you have an internal quality plan in place. You need to make sure that you conduct system and process audits and have all project documentation up to date and audit ready or inspection ready. Be aware of changing regulations and guidelines. And as Lisa mentioned, keep abreast of applications for projects that you may have contributed to, as you may be notified of an inspection several years later. Let's not recreate the wheel. Guidelines and manuals are available on the health authority websites. We've included the links within this slide. Finally, I'd like to conclude with a quote from Robert H. Schuller. Spectacular achievement is always preceded by unspectacular preparation. And with that, I'll hand it back to Melanie.
Thank you very much, Carolee, and thank you, Lisa. I appreciate your time on the webinar today. We do have several questions that have come in online, so we're going to go through Q&A right now. If you are in the audience and you've been sitting on a question, please go ahead and submit that through the questions portal in the webinar. We should have about 10 to 15 minutes to go through some of the questions, and if we're not able to address yours specifically, we'll try to follow up via email directly to you. First up, this one, we have a slide number on this one, slide 11. Let me get back to it here. All right, so talking about for-cause inspections, they're asking what makes a complaint valid to trigger the for-cause inspection, and are they anonymous, or would you know where the complaint came from? Carolee, would you answer, you went on this slide, would you answer this one?
Sure. That's a great question. So most health authorities have information on their website on how to launch a complaint, and it can often be done by regular old snail mail, by email, a number of different formats. So what they would be looking for, and it would be the health authority decision as to whether a complaint was valid. Obviously, anything related to data integrity or patient safety would be priority. They would look at and communicate with the complainant and expect there to be evidence. Once they've evaluated the evidence, they would determine whether an inspection was warranted. They might just decide to send a warning letter. They could send a request for additional information, but if the complaint's serious enough, they would schedule a for-cause inspection. The reason they do it as unannounced is so that they can see exactly what's going on, that nothing has been, without the ability to prepare, they have a real time look at what the issue is on site.
Great, thank you. And then here's another question about unauthorized people posing as official auditors. Is this a big concern for this industry, and would there be a proper protocol or company-specific procedure for this? Carolee, do you have comments on that one?
I do. So it's not something that happens frequently, but it is something that does happen and something that we can prevent 100% of the time simply by checking the credentials. So it was in fact an FDA BIMO inspector that shared this anecdote with me, and an inspection had taken place at a facility. The site had not asked, or the facility staff had not asked to see the inspector's credentials. The inspection had taken place, and following the inspection, the staff had wanted to ask some questions in follow-up to some of the discussions. So they contacted the local FDA field office and were told that they had absolutely no record of requesting the inspection or an inspection being conducted. So obviously, it's confidential information that inspectors are looking at and proprietary information. So this is something that we want to make sure that we prevent 100% of the time, and it takes but a minute to ask for the health authority issued credentials or identification.
Right. Lisa, looks like this next one is for you, slide 17. Let me see if I can get there. Here we go. So talking about the providing lunch, water, and snacks comment that you have up here. The question is, should the company pay for the investigator's lunch, or are there rules around that?
Yeah, in fact, that's a timely question. We were having this discussion a couple weeks ago with a couple of colleagues, and the context of providing lunch, water, snacks, and any other breakfast items throughout the course of the inspection is to ensure that this cost to provide additional investigator or inspector lunch or meals is not of additional burden to the organization. At the time that we actually reviewed this, the FDA website does have some guidance on this specific point, and that again, if the cost to provide an inspector lunch is not extraneous above the cost to provide lunch to your set of employees supporting the inspection, that this is acceptable. Now, of course, I wouldn't go buy a steak dinner for the inspector, and they will most likely not accept or split their way if this is done outside hours of the inspection. But the guidance from the FDA does allow for negligible increases for a lunch for the inspector.
Great. Well, thanks for clearing that up. This one is also for you, Lisa, on the same slide here. Do you have any tips on not filling those gaps of silence that you talked about?
Yeah, and this is, again, as I mentioned, this is a tough one because we as humans just are normally uncomfortable with silence. So we feel that pressure or desire to fill it, even if it's not related to the line of questioning or the context that's occurring within the room or the open communication. I think everybody has their own way to, I guess, remind them of something that they should or shouldn't be doing. Maybe sit on your hands or hold your hands clasped together, to trigger you to remember not to fill this silence. I think the one thing, too, that it's important to note is to provide this awareness to your employees. Again, this is a very common experience and tactic that's used through the course of an inspection. And if you prepare your employees and provide them the awareness that this is used, they won't feel pressured to fill it. They will actually almost expect it, which will make it feel not as uncomfortable.
Right. I definitely agree. Silence is uncomfortable, and that's a skill that is to be learned. I feel like I would just sing a song in my head, probably.
Yes. Whatever you need to do, it's just providing that own cue and awareness on how to get through that period of silence.
Great. All right. This one is, someone's asking, what is the difference between an inspection and an audit? Carolee, would you like to take that one?
Sure. So we do incorrectly often use the terms interchangeably, but when it comes to a health authority, it's an inspection. Audits are done by sponsors and CROs for quality management and vendor qualification and oversight. I like to call audits our own quality management and housekeeping initiative. It gives us the opportunity to make sure when we're conducting vendor audits to make sure that we're working with a vendor that's qualified to meet our needs. And when we're auditing, for example, investigational sites, we're making sure that we identify any processes, any issues, and cleaning house before they might be inspected by a health authority.
Great, good to know the difference there. We have a sponsor asking, as a CRO at Stiris or SDC, how would you help me as a sponsor get through an investigation? Lisa, do you have thoughts on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. And here at SDC, we've done this on a lot of different contexts. So I think it's looking at the timeline and time frame for when that inspection is coming. If as a supporting organization in CRO, we've already provided all TMF documentation, then it really is being available to answer questions We've conducted pre-meetings with the organizations ahead of the inspection. We have even supported on-site during the course of a regulatory inspection, or we can always do it remotely to provide that context. Given that we are a data management services and biostatistics organization, that expertise might not be available in-house during the course of the inspection, so we can always provide that availability to ensure that you get through that inspection successfully. The other thing too is if the timing is where it is a live or active project and hasn't been submitted and we still maintain the documentation, we can help by providing that documentation in advance, keeping in mind, of course, that it might not be at its final stage, but to provide that documentation to help you get through the inspection successfully.
And from the Stiris perspective, we find it very useful to send the clinical research associate, if it were to be a site inspection, to send the clinical research associate to the site. They can provide the support the site needs in order to prepare for a relatively smooth inspection, make sure that everything is organized and that all of the required study documentation is in place. We would also recommend, time permitting, a mock inspection so that we can fill in any gaps and make sure that the sponsor or the CRO is good and ready for the inspection.
Great. Here's one. It's a little long, so bear with me. For scheduled inspections, do you know which specific inspector will be conducting the inspection? I understand that certain inspectors can be very tough or focus on particular areas, and knowing who that inspector is prior to them arriving can help you prepare. So again, do you know who the inspector is who's going to be coming and inspecting your facility? Lisa, do you have thoughts on that one?
Yeah. So again, if it is a scheduled inspection, you'll most likely receive an agenda, and that agenda will list inspectors that will be arriving at your facility. Keep in mind that there's a lot of partnered inspections that are occurring within the multiple agencies. So while you might be undergoing an inspection by one, other inspectors might accompany them from other regulatory authorities, and you might not have that information prior to them arriving at your facility. But for a scheduled inspection, you will have that list of names. It is helpful to, if you have the opportunity to, talk within the industry. Different inspectors have different focus areas and different areas that they feel are critical to the success of a project, and they might focus on certain areas more than others. So yeah, absolutely, it's helpful to have those conversations ahead of time if you have the opportunity to, just so that you can control and understand your expectations for the course of the inspection.
Great, thank you. Thank you again so much for joining us. This has been SDC and Stiris Research with Quality Assurance for Clinical Operations, Stress Reducing Tips for Successful Regulatory Inspection. Have a great day, everyone.